Right, everyone having a good time?
Yeah.
Inspirational?
Yeah.
Collaborating? Listening? Right, let's take a moment to stop then. My next guest. We've got some amazing guests today, by the way. Hope you agree with that. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Sure. Round of applause then for our guests so far. And what about our hosts, Martin and Tonya? Excellent. So our next guest is another inspirational person that we're having a chat with. And he is currently responsible for improving and protecting the health of 1.2 million citizens of Birmingham. Not many then. He has trained as a GP, spent his life so far supporting public health and medicine. He supported Birmingham and the majority of this region through COVID, advising and supporting citizens of Birmingham and the West Midlands on how to get through that, while actually responding himself and his team to an ever-changing world. He's been a thinker in residence in Australia. He's worked local, regionally and nationally and internationally to do with public health. And his expertise range from a multitude of things which we'll talk about. The gentleman that I'd like to introduce you to is Dr. Justin Varney. First of all, I totally appreciate the footwear.
Always on trend.
Justin, welcome.
Thank you.
You have had a huge amount to do recently in the world, but there is something that we spoke about previously that I just wanted to start our conversation off on, if you don't mind. You say you're a committed advocate of community engagement and inclusion, and that being open and authentic and a compassionate leader is something really important to you. So tell me more about that.
So where do I start? Start about being committed to community engagement. I think one of the things it's a phrase we use, particularly in the public sector. We just everyone's all about community engagement, citizen-centred, patient-focused. And yet we use these terms like BAME and LGBT and disabled, and we homogenise people's identities into these little shortened acronyms. And very rarely do we actually spend time out in the communities understanding the differences. And one of the privileges, but also one of the challenges of Birmingham is, much like Wolverhampton, cities attract large populations. So it's not good enough to just talk about BAME people and say all ethnic people are the same. I mean, the idea that we would say the people in Wolverhampton are the same as the people in Milan or in Dusseldorf, and we all have the same health issues and we approach our lives in the same way is bonkers. Yet we do it every day. We say African and Caribbean people, all the same. We say people from South Asia, all the same. And yet when you actually start to engage with communities, you sit down and you understand some of the richness and the diversity, you really start to learn about why these words are just inadequate. And that leads to a different place of leadership, a different place of engagement, and a different way of having the conversation. But it also makes you reflect on how huge the world is, and none of us can know it all. And that gives a different style of humility and compassion in leadership.
Fantastic. And looking at some of your previous work on the communities that you're talking about, which I've actually worked in as well, so I'd like to have a little bit of a chat about those. We've both worked in homelessness and preventing homelessness. We've both supported and looked at and supported people in domestic violence and domestic abuse. Reducing physical inactivity. It was going well for me before COVID, but hasn't gone particularly well after. Improving workplace health. I work within and around HR teams as my profession, and tackling health inequalities. I'm half South Asian and half European, and there were lots of things that come with that. Mm-hmm. So how have those experiences supported you in being in charge of public health and trying to look at those inequalities?
So I think, I came into medicine because I never wanted to be bored, and I've been really fortunate of having a career that hasn't necessarily gone quite to plan, but I've ended up in places that allow me to continue to be interested, to continue to be curious, and continue to learn. And homelessness is a good example. I happened to be the duty doctor for South East London over the Christmas period back in 2000 roughly, and the phone rang on Boxing Day at about 2:00 in the afternoon, and they said, sorry to bother you, Dr. Varney. We've had 6 cases of acute diarrhea and vomiting in the Crisis Open Christmas shelter in New Cross, and they've all had to go to hospital. We think this could be an acute outbreak of something. Some of them have got temperatures, etc. And public health, you go into this automated response of, okay, outbreak response, what's going on, who's affected, everything else like that. I spent the next 3 days climbing over pipes from the portaloos and toilets, measuring the temperature of food in the kitchen, trying to work out what was going on, and trying to stop that number that started at 6 and then became 14 and then was 32. And at the same time working with the regional director, because actually the fragility of the NHS, particularly at Christmas, once we hit about 60 acute admissions, we would have had to close hospitals for admissions. That's how fragile the boundary is between everything working okay and then suddenly people having to go into stopping elective surgery, stopping doing things, etc. And through all of that, working with a shelter of volunteers who were there to try and give homeless people the best Christmas they possibly could have, while they were scared and they were seeing friends and people they were working with get very, very sick and get taken into hospital. And that taught me a lot about working with people and just meet them where they're at, and put your assumptions aside, and just start with where are people at today and how do you engage with them, listening to what the real fears were, understanding the wider system and how all of this kind of jigsaw played together. And then off the back of that, I suddenly found myself being the kind of go-to person in public health for homelessness for a couple of years. And at that point, I hadn't even become a consultant. I was still in training. But it was because I was someone who cared. And I think that's probably the lesson that I've taken forward when it comes to how do you wrestle with these wicked issues? How do you really start to talk about the structural discrimination in society? How do you talk about, we're not going to flip obesity by putting everyone in Weight Watchers or Slimming World. We've got to have some really difficult conversations about the way we build our society and the way it functions. And it taught me the compassion to approach that with, and the what I hope is the humility to listen to other people and recognise there is no great wonder drug, there's no app that's going to solve this. It is hard slog cultural change.
And so with a lot of those groups, and particularly homelessness, we label as a society. We're quite good at labelling people. And I like to understand how people identify rather than label. And I sit here as an openly gay woman. I class myself as a lesbian, and I have different abilities. I've had a transplant on my eye and I'm wearing hearing aids. I'm a stepmom, I'm a wife. There's lots of things that I identify with. And I know that's really important to you on identity and the different views that I have, not only in public health, but as a leader. So how do you identify, Justin?
Oh, this is where it becomes a bit like a shopping list. As a cisgender white gay man who's in an interracial marriage, who has long-term conditions. I don't have specific faith, but I definitely have belief. And as someone who has been fortunate to grow up in first generation of affluence with grandparents who, my grandmother on one side cleaned the pubs for a living, my grandfather was a panel beater in the Black Country. Yet my parents made money, so they gave me everything that they didn't have. And what I would say is, two sides of the label conversation. First is, I'm fortunate in that many of my identity labels, there are tick boxes on the form. But for many, there aren't. We talk about homelessness. but there is no way of measuring homelessness. We don't have a tick box in the NHS for homelessness. We talk about how important care leavers are and our duty of care, yet it is not recorded on any system other than the care system, whether someone has experience of care. And we say nice things about communities like sex workers, and yet they're not measured anywhere, and there is no kind of coherent strategy and approach. So there's a real thing for me about who's not being counted. And many people have said what we value in society are the things that we count. And therefore, what does it say about these communities that we don't bother to count them? The second is in the labelling space in that conversation is there is a power dynamic. As a white man in a position of power, I do use the doctor label, and I know I use it, and I use it intentionally in many spaces, partially because it allows you to know that I'm clinically trained, that I hope it gives you a sense of safety and security. But I am not averse to using it as a power dynamic to assert authority on behalf of the people that need to be heard and need to be seen. And that is that inclusive allyship that one of our other speakers spoke about today. And more of us need to step into that space of inclusive allyship to help those that are just not counted and not visible.
Really interesting. And I think the concept of inclusivity and being an ally is something that we should all carry forward. And I say a concept because it's got based on your own lived experience and how you identify and how others around you. But previously you've mentioned, and I wanted to bring it into this conversation, people walk the world in different ways. We need to move forward together. Tell me more.
So, I suppose all through my career, I've had opportunities to spend time with people with very different paths in life. And I think that has given me an appreciation. I mean, it's that phrase of you only walk the world in your own shoes, and think about what it feels like to walk in someone else's shoes. I was very fortunate to be supported with an experience in drag, and frankly, walking in heels, not something I'm going to do every day. Full respect to the women that do. But actually, I'd say that in a slightly jokey way, but heels are bloody uncomfortable if you're a bloke and you've never walked in them before.
Or a woman that's never walked.
Absolutely. But actually, just trying that different footwear gives you an inkling of what it is like to walk the world in a different way. I think the other thing is that there seems to be this mythology that we all walk our world with a roadmap of where we're going. That you should come out of school, you should go to university, you should get a job, and these are the 3 jobs you're going to do, and then you retire, and retirement's all beautifully structured. And the reality is that life just isn't like that. And that is where being able to recognise that there is no perfect roadmap to life. The journey that we each individually walk through life is a product of what's around us, the opportunities that we have, how we face the obstacles ahead of us. But it's also the people that walk alongside us. And, I recently had several colleagues who lost people. And I said, one of the phrases I use is, be grateful for the time that the person walked alongside you. The memories that they shared and the footsteps that were with you in the journey, they are for you to cherish. They are your journey shared. No one else shares that journey in the way that you do, and no one stays on the same journey with us forever. Yeah, you didn't know it was going to get deep there.
No, I didn't.
That's the problem with not prepping questions.
Exactly. Fireside chats are not prepared. And so with that in mind, I have a phrase as a leader in my own right of I choose who I follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I want people to choose to follow me as a leader. So if that's a conversation you're having with people about be grateful for the steps alongside you and around you, what would you want to tell us or talk about in relation to being a leader that has had a really difficult and volatile external couple of years in public health? A leader that is a cisgendered white male, as you've said, but also a leader that's trying to break down barriers and potentially has a platform that maybe some of us don't have.
Yeah. So let me start with the end of that first, if I may. So I remember probably over a decade ago, I was talking at a Gay Men's Health Summit in the US. And this was a gathering of gay men's health activists from all over the world, but predominantly from the US. And I gave what I thought was quite a rousing speech. I was definitely going through my Elizabeth I era. And at the end of it, a guy that represented the Black gay men's movement in the US got up and said, "You should give up your seat for a Black gay man." And I paused and I thought for a second and I said, "Tell me when you gave up your seat for a disabled gay man." And he looked at me. I mean, there was that absolute pin drop moment in the room. How dare you? Because race politics in the US, even more complicated and difficult than here. But it led to an interesting conversation about, when we talk about inequalities, there is this hierarchy. But I also said, I went on to say, look, I'm very fortunate because of my job to have a privilege of a seat at a table. There are never enough seats at the table. I will bring in people into the room if I can, carrying my handbag, because it's a way of getting people experience and exposure to those senior leadership spaces. And it's one of the few ways I can bring people into the room that would never get to see or experience that until they're sat in the seat that I am. But also think of me at the kind of the front end of the wedge. And part of being leader is recognizing that you are the front end of the wedge. And you have to go and have the conversations with the people that you're advocating for and engaging with to be able to represent their voices authentically. And certainly my journey with the trans community, I started getting involved in LGBT politics in the 1990s. And where we are now and where we were then are completely different spaces. And I've had times when I've misspoken or misunderstood, and it's been a journey of learning. So I think as a leader, having the humility of knowing you don't know everything and you need to go and talk to people to learn and be able to advocate for what they want rather than what you think they want.
So that leads me on to then what I'm hearing in that is, and in a previous Fireside chat we spoke about being brave, asking a question, you don't know what you don't know. So that seems to me about getting comfortable in being uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, that's one of my phrases.
I do.
You do. This is where the homework came in. I think it's really hard when you start going out to some of these communities that have never been shown the respect. I mean, when I first came to Birmingham, I went to a whole load of ward forums. And for those of you that haven't engaged with local politics, every local authority has elected members. All elected members are supposed to hold ward forums. That's where they meet the community they're responsible for. That's the idea of how democracy is supposed to work. And I would pitch up, and first of all, the elected member would go, "Oh, it's lovely to see you, Justin. What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Well, I've just come to watch and listen and understand, because I live in Birmingham, but I don't, I live in the city centre, so Birmingham's a huge city." And then citizens would go, "Oh, we've never seen a director before. It's always been a junior officer come out." And then sometimes they would take the opportunity to tell me about everything that had gone wrong with the council for the last 20 years. And I've been in the job about 5 minutes. And some of that was really hard because some of the way they've been treated, some of the way they've been supported was awful. I get the same experience often when I'm working and engaging with communities of identity. And two things it teaches me. One is people value being seen and being heard. And as a senior leader, you should never be too busy to walk the floor with the people that you serve. It's a really, really important part of leadership because it keeps you grounded in getting beyond the numbers. You can talk about X number of patients on a waiting list, but when you walk into the clinic and see people sitting in the waiting room, then it's real. So there's that first element of that. And the second is you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because none of those conversations go the way you think you're going to go. You can prep all you like, but someone is going to have an experience that completely unnerves you. Someone's going to have had a horrendous situation that you listen to and you go, professionally, whoever that professional was should be slammed into a process tomorrow. It's completely unacceptable. Some of them will trigger bits of your history. And getting to a space of recognizing being uncomfortable is not a bad thing. It's part of the journey of learning, I think, is a really important part of getting into a different space in your leadership, because it makes you continually be open to the curiosity and the challenge that comes with that curiosity.
And so the final thing from me, Justin, if we could all take one thing away that would empower us to start tackling some of that inequity and injustice, what would you say?
Get curious. I've been doing a lot of work on how do we develop cultural intelligence in leadership, and Birmingham will be piloting a new programme where we've been really exploring this. And it really struck me that too many of us grow up with this phrase, curiosity killed the cat. I think it's Alice in Wonderland. It's like, and that's a really damaging bit of childhood storytelling, because curiosity didn't kill Alice. Curiosity gave Alice a completely different world perspective and completely changed her through her adventures. And too often we lead our lives in the safety of our bubble, because being curious requires us to be brave. It requires us to know we're going to be uncomfortable. It requires us to step out of the daily normal and step into a space where we are open to knowing that we don't know something. So it requires vulnerability. So I would say get curious.
Everybody, Dr. Justin Varney, thank you so much.